Shooting it raw?
Yes, shooting it raw. Okay, so let's dive into your first, okay?
Yeah, no problem.
History of human progress. It's actually a very I don't want to say endearing, but it's a very like an eye-catching graphic in the sense that it's a graph with a y and an x-axis. And by the way, bring in the data. I love it. On the y-axis, you have energy plus knowledge increasing, and on the x-axis, you have basically years going back in the past, where the beginning is 4 million, then 2 million, then 50,000, then 10,000, then 5,000, 2,000, 500 years ago, 300 years ago, 200 years, 50 years ago, until now. And up in this kind of whimsical, arrows kind of going up and down, kind of almost like a ladder, just kind of increasing over time. We see various entries, which I think you'll discuss. So let me give it. Yeah, so what am I looking at?
Yeah, so this first chart, and bearing in mind the challenge for this chart, what I wanted to do was to sum up all of human history in one chart, which had to be in black and white and would fit on the page of an A5 book.
Easy.
So that's a bit of a challenge, right? That's a bit of a challenge.
Nice.
So to rewind a little, think about actually, why I wanted to put this chart together, and this whole journey for me has been about climate change. And so I've spent the last 2 years writing this book on climate change, and I did it because I wanted to explore all sides of the climate debate. So so I'm not a hardened environmentalist. So I enjoy nature as much as the next person, but I live in a city. I don't have a particularly strong affinity to nature. But I wanted to kind of approach this climate topic, which is very controversial on both sides, and I wanted to approach it with no preconceived bias. I just wanted to explore all avenues and arguments. How big an issue is climate change? How does it compare with other global problems? Is there a workable solution? What's it going to cost? Is it worth doing? Or are we better off spending our money somewhere else? And if we're going to do something, how quickly do we need to act? And why is it such a challenging problem? And I quickly realized that you just can't start making predictions about the future of humanity without first considering the past. So how did our Earth come to be like it is today? How has climate changed in the past? What role have humans played in this? What arguments have there been, and what arguments are still being waged today on both sides of the coin on all of these topics? So if you start getting stuck into this, you start getting into arguments about are there limits to human growth or limits to human progress? Is progress or growth a good thing, or is it a bad thing? Do we have a moral responsibility because we're the smartest creatures on this planet, or should we just get on with it and do what we want? So I wanted to start understanding how we got here as a species, so we could reflect on that through the book. So this chart, it goes back 4 million years, which is roughly the first human ancestors. And over that period, that's a period where basically the global population has grown from basically 2 to 8 billion people. And as you start piecing together human progress throughout all of this time, you start to realize that there's basically this virtuous circle sort of driving progress between what may be a really small, maybe insignificant or serendipitous discovery, which leads to slightly more surplus energy. And when you have this extra energy, that gives you a little bit more time on your hands because you don't have to look for as much food or fuel. And so you've got a bit more time on your hands. And when you've got a bit more time on your hands, that gives you time to start improving processes and what eventually became known as technology. So that leads to more efficient ways of doing things, but also more efficient ways of recording and transferring knowledge through the generations. So this virtuous circle is more energy, more efficiency, more knowledge. And so what this chart is just is summarizing is all of these key kind of discoveries and changes throughout human history, which expanded our access to energy and expanded our our recorded knowledge base that could get passed on through the generations. So beyond just kind of our biological, what we pass on through our DNA, we can also supplement that with knowledge written in books and things. There's lots of examples we could pick out on there. Let's start with the first one. So one of the earliest breakthroughs for humans was fire and cooking. So our earliest ancestors 3 or 4 million years ago, well, they relied on their hands as their primary means of production and on the power of the sun to grow plants to provide food for energy, so that they could sustain life. But it's pretty inefficient because plants capture about 1% of the sun's energy. Humans only convert about 25% of that energy into of those food calories into kind of useful work. So basically humans were spending all their energy hunting and gathering for more food, and it left very little spare time to figure out how to do things better.
Can I just interrupt for a little bit because so this isn't you ain't my first rodeo, so you know what I mean, like in terms of like just for example, 1 hour is going to go by so fast because it's a
Yeah,
conversation. So just so that you understand just where I'm coming from, right? So the
yeah,
past 15 years, the work I've done has been to look at what we've ended up calling like human advancement. And in a
yeah,
way, the stuff I've been doing, there's a kind of a connection to what you're saying as well, because what you've plotted really is this interrelation between, I guess, technology and human advancement on a survival level. So I assume you've read Guns, Germs, and Steel by what's his name? The author's name. Very, very famous book, Guns, Germs, and Steel. He kind of talks a little bit about what you're talking about, but not from the climate perspective. So
yeah,
if we were to be able to compress all, because it's a very rich visualization that people can look at, if we're going to
yeah.
compress that into a shorter sort of thing, how would you present this in a sort of a shorter kind of version?
I guess to describe this chart, I mean, you can basically track human progress from our first ancestors who unlocked more energy by using fire and tools and cooking to break down food, make it easier to digest, and so we could take on more calories. And this progress then just continued on. So that that led to a bit more time. That meant that they could establish art and language, I guess,
Yeah.
which then it took millions of more years of incremental, pretty slow progress. You come to things like the agricultural revolution, which
Mm-hmm.
boosted food production again per capita because we were tending the land rather than hunting or gathering.
Mm-hmm.
The Sumerians in modern day Iraq, they developed early writing and accounting. So
Right.
again, that helped the knowledge base and disseminating like information, and we started creating those larger sort of social organizational structures. Then you had the scientific revolution, which helped with things like shipbuilding and navigation, which opened up trade around the world, boosting efficiencies across the globe in all regions. But I think one big thing I took away from this is that despite all this amazing progress, up until about 300, 200, 300 years ago, most energy was still just supplied by people,
Mm-hmm.
animals, wood,
Yeah.
maybe wind or water wheels. So progress had been pretty linear. And it wasn't really until we developed the steam engines and unleashed the power of fossil fuels that progress became exponential, right?
Sure.
And so if you look at this chart and you look at a chart plotted of kind of GDP per capita, or your average income of your average human being put into today's money, for most of human history, your average human earned about $1,000 per year in
Right.
the equivalent of today's money. Up until about 200 years ago, and then suddenly that's ballooned to now today it's $18,000 per
Right.
person per year.
Yeah.
And if you plot energy use and knowledge, they do exactly the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
So you had all of this change for 4 million years, but for most of that time, it was pretty linear and pretty slow. And as as production and technology improved, so did the number of human beings.
Yeah.
So the average, even though life was very different, the average sort of well-being of your average human stayed pretty much the same up until we unleashed fossil fuels on the world, basically.
Okay. Clear. Great. Okay, so do you want to use that as the segue to the next image?
Yeah,
Okay.
definitely.
So is life really a gift? Really? Can you make every second count? That's the whole point of the podcast. So if you like what you've seen and you're inspired, because that really is my mission, then please give it a like, subscribe, and share.
Shooting it raw?
Yes, shooting it raw.